This week just passed, I was set to present the second of two shows as a part of the Midsummer Festival 2022 to live in-person audiences. Now, neither of those shows went ahead as initially planned on account of the terrifying wave of Omicron that's been making its way through my local community, but no one forced us to change anything. In fact, the powers that be were rather pushing us more towards an attempt at business as usual. It was my own sense of social responsibility that made me, the producer, sit back, stop, and assess the situation and elect a change trajectory, which has made me ask, how much social responsibility do artists have to their community? For those who don't know me, my name is Artemis, and aside from making internet videos about very niche feelings, I also am a professional theatre maker and cabaret artist, and there's actually been a lot that I've had to deal with in the offline side of my creative practice that has challenged me deeply on an ethical level, so I wanted to try and unpack some of that with you today. But first we gotta talk about why the fuck we even make art. The role of art in society is something that's hotly debated, and I highly doubt that we'll ever achieve consensus on this, partially because art in and of itself is a poorly defined concept to begin with, and it's also an area full of experimentation and play and change. Like, art is not and never will be an objective thing, so of course when you're talking about what role it should play in society, you're going to come up against a whole range of different opinions. Some have said that the purpose of art is to entertain, others to hold the mirror up to society. Some artists claim to create because it helps them express something, and others aim to shape the way their audiences think, act, or feel. That feel one is interesting, because there are some people out there who would be ecstatic to hear that their audiences came away from their work feeling bored. The intention of the artist is what matters in that point, because like comedy aims to make people laugh, whereas horror aims to terrify. And I think most would agree that calling the horror film bad because it didn't make you laugh is just a tad unfair. Then is the role of art perhaps simply to meet the goals of the artist? Maybe. But what if the artist has clumsy goals, nefarious goals? Does the artist not owe something to society in the endeavor of creation? Recently, a number of artists, including musicians Neil Young and Joni Mitchell, have removed their works from streaming giant Spotify's audio library in protest of the platform's decision to continue to host the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Now, calling Joe Rogan's podcast art feels like a bit of a stretch to me, and I'll admit I have some personal biases in that statement. But that aside, the potential for causing active harm through the spreading of misinformation that Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, and others have noted in that podcast is hard to deny. It's just one example of how the things we create don't just exist in this realm of artistic intention. They can and do have real-world effects because, like it or not, humans listen to stories. No political party would try to advertise to us by doing anything other than just stating their policies if they hadn't realized that it's actually far easier to appeal to our emotions. That's why they all try and spin the fact that their opponents are awful, terrible people. Propaganda is a thing for a reason. We listen more to the emotional anecdotes than simple data because stories break through to our brains in a much more memorable way. There's a great video by Zoe B which goes into all of this with far more intellectual and academic rigor than I currently have in me. It's linked in the description. Recommended viewing. Now, if you've been active in the internet any time in the last few years, you've probably heard the term parasocial relationship thrown around. It's a term that was created to try and describe the one-sided sort of feelings of connectedness that an audience can have to someone whose work they're familiar with through some subset of the media. Through prolonged exposure to someone's work, social media, or mainstream media presence, we can develop feelings of attachment akin to a friendship, despite maybe only having a comment's worth of interaction with someone. One thing I'll add to this is that relationships formed over the internet can be really real. I'm not saying that they can't. There are people I've known for close to a decade, collaborated on projects with, grown really strong feelings for, that live on the other side of the planet. The difference between those relationships and the ones I'm calling parasocial is the parasocial ones are generally one-sided. There are artists that I know so much about, I've consumed everything I can find about them on the internet, and so if we were to start interacting, me and that person, a few short conversations is not going to be enough to counteract the hours and hours and hours of learning about this person that I've done. That relationship is automatically unequal as shit, and thus we have a power dynamics problem. That's not even taking into account the creatives whose personas are not one-to-one with their actual selves. Like, heck, if you only know someone from public forms of media, odds are what you're getting is curated in some form or another. What I'm saying right now is scripted. My words carefully chosen. If it feels like I'm your friend, but the only version of me you know is one that's a product of careful decision-making, pre-planning, and rehearsal, then do you really know me? Oh, shit. It's an autistic person who masks all the time. Does that mean no one really knows me? Do I even really know myself? What is the real me like? Does the real me even exist? This all begs the question. Should we hold artists to the same standards we hold our friends to? With the amount of influence that those in the creative fields have through the stories they tell, should the standards we hold them to be higher? Is the next sentence going to be a question too? Will this video answer any of these questions, or is it all just going to be The lockdown here in so-called Melbourne was widely regarded as one of the harshest in the world. This city locked down 6 separate times, each harder to deal with than the last. One of the industries most impacted by this was the live performance scene, including theatres like the one I'm sitting in now. This industry, my industry, was at a standstill. And so, with the state 90% vaccinated, venues, artists, festivals, all were keen to get back to business. Literally.
Your life will be back to normal. You'll be able to enjoy all of the things that you have yearned for and missed.
If you're inside, a bit of distancing. You don't need to crush into a mosh pit. That's probably not a good idea if you're going to see your grandmother on the weekend.
Omicron has changed the landscape.
More than 850 people have been forced into isolation until the weekend.
It is hard. It's hard when I thought all these sorts of fears and worries were behind us.
Pandemic Code Brown.
The state is bracing for up to 2,500 people in hospital with COVID in the coming weeks. It's twice as many as now.
People will no longer be required to get a PCR test to confirm a positive rapid test.
In Melbourne's west, the home of the Bulldogs is now also the home of the Rats.
And the demand is only set to grow.
And this is all a part of, the QAnon types of tyrannical, pedophile, COVID-19 government type of narrative. And we saw that getting picked up here in Australia.
Now we've reported 35 deaths in the last 24 hours.
I'm worried about the exemption for teachers to not isolate if they don't have symptoms.
We really thought it'd be that easy, hey? It's hard to take a really strong moral position on things when you're worried where your next meal is going to come from. It's why the vast majority of people spreading COVID at the beginning of this were the people who could not afford to stay home. There may be the thing that you feel is right to do, but when the stakes are high, the incentive is going to be with the thing that helps you survive in the moment. When I was a kid with aspirations of being an actor, I'd boldly declare to anyone who'd listen that I would never work in advertising. Manipulating people into spending money on things, anythings, that was antithetical to my goal as an artist, which was to tell important stories. Cut to me 1 year out of drama school, I would have killed to be in an ad. Like, at that point, I knew that in this industry, that's where all the money was, and I wasn't getting any other work. So, when I finally landed a job singing Christmas carols to sell beer, I boasted about it proudly.
Everybody knows a turkey and some mistletoe.
It wasn't until my dad pointed out the public health concerns about promoting the sale of alcohol that I realised just how far I'd come from those values I'd held so strongly when I was a teen. It's kind of the same thing as how I didn't buy my friend's book when he self-published on Amazon until it went to a different retailer and then still streamed on Twitch. Like, it's hypocritical as heck. I'm aware of this. And yes, I know, no ethical consumption under capitalism. Unfortunately, that turn of phrase is not a get-out-of-jail-free card excusing all the shitty decisions we make regarding our spending and time investments. It's complicated as heck, and I'd like to think that if I was offered, say, an Audible sponsorship, that I'd have the strength of character to say, no thanks. Or at least put in a video about how great libraries are, but I don't know if I can trust myself to do that. Like, I don't know if I would. And by the way, libraries are the best. Like, you can borrow audiobooks from them for free, and they sometimes, depending on your library service, you might be able to borrow sewing machines or audio interfaces, microcontrollers, and they tend to have a great range of social support services. Like, I'm a library stan through and through. Perhaps I actually should make that libraries video. Anyway, the hit the arts has taken from the COVID-19 pandemic has been far from insignificant. Stories of artists giving up on the industry entirely and returning to jobs they'd once left to pursue their passions, far from uncommon. I mean, when your entire livelihood dries up overnight, you have to turn somewhere for income. Some tried to make Zoom theatre, which I have to say I'm not a fan of. Not a fan. Yeah, I feel like it values both the forms of theatre and live streaming by trying so hard to pretend that the former is not the latter. Yeah, and it's not the best form of adaptation I've seen so far. Others like me chose to try their hand in the online creator space. Some set to work on the big thing that they would release once all of this was over, but realistically speaking, unless you had a big chunk of savings to fall back on, you were probably looking at picking up work in another industry or relying on unemployment benefits to survive this period. I personally moved back in with Mum, and not everyone had the ability to do that. In any case, the effect was that from March 2020 to December 2021, things were pretty rough financially for many artists in the live performance sector. So, when artists excitedly started planning shows after hitting that 90% vaccinated threshold, only to realise that they were set to be putting them on during the largest wave of COVID-19 yet, many felt compelled to push on. And I totally understand that. When looking at my show Extravaganza, I felt so torn about what to do. A, because selfishly, yeah, I could use that paycheck. I mean, I've been hemorrhaging savings since the federal government decided to stop paying people to stay home. But also B, whatever decision me and my co-producer came to would affect 12 other artists. All of those people would suddenly be without work. And given it was a profit share production, no show meant no profits, and no profits meant no paycheck for all of those people. Like, I knew in my gut that the socially responsible thing to do, given the pandemic situation, was to not go ahead. But all of that was swirling around in my brain. Like, if I cancelled the show, how was I any better than a small business owner who laid off all their employees without a payout? Like, this is all just a failure of my budgeting to take into account the public health crisis I knew we were in. I think there's no way I could think I'm better than anyone else. Perhaps more optimistic or naive. Perhaps the problem inherent to all of this is the way I think about art. Like, I think of it as a worthy endeavour in and of itself, and the need to make money from it more an unfortunate side effect of needing to survive in the society I currently live in. But the arts is a billion-dollar industry here in so-called Australia. Like, admittedly one that the government likes to undermine for various reasons, but still a lucrative area in which business happens. If I thought of myself as a business person first and an artist second, would I be making better choices? The incentive if viewing the creative process as a business venture is to favour following trends over following interests, greatest reach over greatest impact, quantity over quality, and consistency over exploration. These can all be great frameworks for a small business to abide by, but can be quite antithetical to the process of making great art, which is often about play and exploration of circling an idea for months and months with nothing but questions before realizing that maybe you can't find all the answers. This is why I find the dissolution of any creative endeavor in the age of the internet down to content particularly concerning. It becomes a product to sell first and something with inherent merit second at best. It's just a thing that gets people to visit your platforms and to stay there. When I look at how successful businesses treat their employees, I'm usually appalled. It's clear that the system incentivizes businesses to pay workers as little as possible in order to maximize profits. And if I ever start to look at the creative process that way, I've truly lost my way. The profit share model is absolutely a risk, but hopefully it's a more equal risk. Everyone involved invests their time and labor together in the hopes of creating something, and then any reward gained is split fairly between them. There's certainly a school of thought that says if you can't afford to pay people properly, just to not do the thing. I completely agree with that. That 100% would be my baseline if I was doing this just to make money, but the purpose of creating art is so much more than that. And it leaves me in this grey puddle of messy morality. This happens because I try to walk the tightrope between being a storyteller and being a business owner. To try and not make such unsound financial decisions that I inadvertently end up bankrupting myself or even worse, harming my collaborators, but to also not let the pursuit of money prevent me from exploring, from creating, from telling those stories, and from collaborating with others who also view profit as secondary. Perhaps this is an unwise set of goals, but to me, the alternative is letting the creative process be something that only the wealthiest of us with an excess of funds to spare are allowed to do, or keeping us tied to the whims of funding bodies that literally do not have the money needed to fund every worthwhile project. It's not a perfect system. It's flawed and contradictory, but I continue to do it because I'm foolish enough to hope that the things I'm creating are a benefit to my community. Gosh, I hope they are. So if I do all of this for my community, at what point do I set aside financial aspirations because of the responsibility I have to protect and contribute to my communities in positive ways? The decision to postpone Extravaganza and move Artemis online were carried by my feeling of responsibility to both my team and my audiences. Extravaganza was holding space in a large venue with a large number of collaborating artists. My co-producer had caught the darn virus the week before we made the call, and from the conversations I was having with my team, a number of them were feeling apprehensive about continuing on with the show according to our original plan. On the other hand, Artemis, whilst a one-person show in a much smaller venue, is essentially a show about my experience coming to terms with my neurodivergence, my disability, and I was seeing a number of people from the disabled community talking about how, with the current situation, a number of them felt left behind, felt as though everyone else was seeing them as expendable, felt as though they had to go into a really, really harsh lockdown to counteract all the people out there acting as if nothing was going on at all. Given all that, I didn't feel right promoting this show and encouraging people to come out to the theatre. Let me be explicitly clear here. No one is expendable. Except maybe the pricks that got us in this situation, but they certainly weren't coming to my lefty queer shows. They are into cabaret, variety nights. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So yeah, I made those calls. But there have been other ethical considerations in the past that I've been aware of and did not act upon. A number of artists recently stood up to boycott the Sydney Festival over their sponsorship deal with the Israeli embassy, with several events being pulled from the festival in protest. Now, this is largely a decision that my little lefty bubble looked upon favourably, with the artists who continued to take part in the festival receiving criticism for that decision, but I will note that the artists that folks were most upset with were the ones who tried to justify their continued participation. Towards the end of 2021, casting for the next iteration of the Melbourne production of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child was underway, and some peers in the industry rightfully noted that I, as a 5-foot-tall, short person, would possibly be a good candidate to play a child and encouraged me to audition. Now, naturally, as a trans autistic person who had been pretty heavily burnt by some of the comments made by one particularly turfy writer of this play, I told them that I could not justify taking a role in the show, which they all understood. But some of them pointed to other trans actors who felt it was imperative that they get this job, because then they'd be taking that TERF money and putting it in the pockets of trans actors. It was an interesting idea, but I still wasn't quite convinced. Sure, if every trans actor had turned down that audition, there'd be a number of cis people of varying degrees of ignorance willing to step up and take their place. And yes, if we had managed to fill that production with all trans actors, it would be an amazing fuck you to Miss Turfy Turfy Book Turf. But do you know what would be even more powerful? If we as an industry had collectively decided not to supply performers to that production, if we all agreed to withhold our labour. That's the power of boycotts, but they don't work as a half measure, which is why those who weren't participating in the Sydney Festival boycott were questioned on that decision. It's a powerful form of collective action that can call into question unethical practices when we see them. But what if unethical things are going on and no formal organising has been started yet? As far as I'm aware, I've never continued to participate in a festival after an active boycott has been called, but there have been times when organisations I've associated with have had their practices called into question. For example, the very first Melbourne Fringe Festival I was a part of in 2019 was notable for being the year in which the festival was criticised for platforming yellowface through the show Aisha the Aussie Geisha. It's probably Aisha the Aussie Geisha, that would rhyme, that would make sense. Whilst the festival and the artists behind the work eventually made the decision to pull the show, before that decision was made, I saw a lot of talk about how the festival was an open one, with no effort being made to curate or constrain any of the works present in its program, which made me question how I felt about such a model. How would I feel about my work being presented right next to others that I might find outright disagreeable or potentially even harmful? Ultimately, I chose to proceed. And then we have the Midsummer Festival, which I registered 2 shows in, and I probably would have proceeded with them without saying a word if it weren't for our pal Omicron being a downright menace. Several years in a row, I have publicly criticised the festival for continuing to allow the police force and other groups to actively work to take away the rights of queer folks to march in the Pride March, which is one of the key offerings of the festival. I've done so by signing open letters to this effect, singing songs about the true meaning of pride, etc. But I've still chosen to participate in the festival time and time again, despite Midsummer continuing to hold their position on this issue. I'm not the only one speaking out either. Year after year, large numbers of artists and community leaders step up and make known how they feel, which is largely in line with how the vast majority of the community feels, by the way. In a survey conducted by the Victorian Pride Lobby in 2020, 75.27% of respondents indicated a feeling that the Victoria Police should not march in uniform at Pride March. Of the trans and gender diverse community, 89.24% did not want police involvement in this way. In fact, 80% of survey respondents indicated that they did not feel safe at community events where a large police presence was involved.
I'm not entirely sure where the Imperial March is coming from right now.
Now, despite all of this, my personal experiences with police, community consensus, and Midsummer's apparent lack of interest in altering this aspect of their policy, I've continued to present work with the festival. Part of this is because large-scale celebrations of the queer community are rare where I live, and so to not participate feels a bit like a missed opportunity. My co-producer and I created Ace-Stravaganza after we noticed that ACEPECs were largely being left out of conversations about the queer community. The visibility of ACEs and AROs in that program meant something, which is one of the reasons why it broke my heart to have to postpone that event. Without our event in that program, where do the ACEPECs go to see themselves represented? And without seeing themselves represented, how many people in that community start to buy into the rhetoric that ACEs and AROs do not belong in the queer community at queer events? Another large part of it is that this is kind of what I'm known for. Like, I'm that NB ACE cabaret person, and my audience kind of expects me to be present at events like this. So what does community responsibility mean when you have an audience with the diversity of needs and it's impossible to serve all of those needs at once? I think part of the messiness of this is looking at this as a matter of personal responsibility on the part of the artist instead of something we need to address as a community. It was so much easier to stay home when that was something we were doing collectively. It's so much easier to pull your work out of the festival that's doing some sketchy shit when it's part of a well-organized boycott rather than something we're left to contend with alone. When we conceptualize the artist, we tend to think of individuals that do great things, and the fact of the matter is, a lot of those individuals tend to have a great number of people working behind or alongside them. The arts is an inherently collaborative medium, and I think that's why this sense of social responsibility weighs so strongly on me, because storytelling is inherently about connection. And if I didn't have a sense of respect for the story I was telling and the people I was telling it to, I don't think I'd be a very good storyteller. I wish I had a clearer conclusion for you. I guess if this video has proven anything, it's that I'm a messy being of contradiction that's always trying to balance my more selfish, ambitious side that's tempted by the realities of living in a society where I have to trade my labor in for cash, and my more idealistic, artistic side that believes in creating for creating's sake and wants to tell the stories that need to be told even if it pisses off the powers that be. Like, these are two very real conflicting parts of me that are always at war, and I'm sure I'm not the only artist that feels that way. When I first watched Bo Burnham's Inside, I was really unimpressed with how self-aware it was. Like, it just seemed to be so aware of its social positionality, but not really doing much else than pointing at it.
And there's only one thing that I can do about it, while being paid and being the center of attention.
I became less unimpressed the more the further into that I got, but I still had those feelings, and it's not lost on me that this video is basically doing the same thing in a less artistically interesting way. But I still wanted to share this in the hopes that maybe it starts a conversation about the place art has in this messy world of ours and how we as artists can navigate the grey areas that come with the job. Let's all try to tell the stories that need to be told and leave the world a little better than we found it. Thanks for bearing with me on this one. Definitely a more unconventional video for me. I had a lot to get off my chest. I hope there was some merit in it for you. I also just wanted to take this moment to thank my creative communities. Thank you. You hold me accountable. You show me the power art can have every day, and I owe you so much for it. Now, if you're here thinking, oh, hey, Artemis, you sound like you make cool things outside of YouTube, that's correct. And my show Artemis, the online version of that, is available to stream for $15. You can rent it for $15 until the 2nd of March 2022. So if you're watching this in that window and you want to support me, I'd love it if you watch it. It was a little disheartening to perform it to, you know, an audience of cameras and then close the show immediately. I've never done something like that before, so I'd really appreciate anyone who watches it and lets me know what they think. Super be keen for that. And if you want to support me in other ways, I do have a Patreon. With that, you get a monthly process video where I talk through the art of creating art for that particular month. And at higher tiers, you get cool packs like, you know, behind the scenes clips or your name in this list of good humans right here that you are looking at right now. This feels really weird to do at the end of that particular video, but if I don't mention it, people don't know they're there, and then I get told off by people who care about me and want to support me. So those are the things. They exist. Do the YouTube things, liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, the things that tell the algorithm that you like this video and want it to show it to other people. I'd appreciate that. And if you're like me and you watch in double speed, that does affect watch time. So maybe put it on mute and play it again, because that's what I try and do. But anyway, thank you for listening to this. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day, night, and I'll see you next time. Bye!